Hello, my name is Marco Eidinger, and I'm happy to be here with you at Devtoberfest. And I will talk about how to build beautiful native mobile applications with SAP Fiori for iOS. I'm a developer myself in the team for the SDK for iOS. And this session is for you if you are a Swift developer, if you're curious or even familiar with the SDK for iOS, or in general, if you want to get an overview about SAP's Pro-Code solution to implement enterprise applications for Apple devices. You will enjoy the session even more if you have Swift development, especially at the end of the session. But if you don't worry. In today's session, I will cover 3 topics. First, I will introduce the Fiori for iOS design language and its guidelines. I will touch on the foundation, which includes colors, typography, adaptive design, accessibility, and more. I will also show you how to explore and get familiar with UI components through the Fiori Mentor App, which you can download on your iPad. Next, I will introduce the SDK that implements and provides those UI components natively to US Swift developers. The SDK works together with SAP's business technology platform and mobile services on top of it. I won't go too much into detail, but I will definitely show you tooling that allows you to generate a fully functional application without writing a single line of code. But more importantly, I will then show you how to get most out of the SDK by reusing the UI components, which comes with it. Therefore, I will spend a good part of the session in Xcode. My goal is to familiarize you with the SDK APIs and how to best use the reusable UI components. I will do this last part with examples. Definitely, I will show you the object card view, which is new in version 8.0. And if we have time, I will show you how to incorporate the what's new component into the onboarding flow so that you can inform your users about new and important functionality when they onboard the app. So, first topic, Fiori for iOS design language and guidelines. And for this, I even might switch directly to the Fiori Mentor App application. And let me try to share my iPad for this purpose. And I have this here connected. Okay, so the Fiori Mentor App you can download from the App Store on your iPad. And what it does, it gives you information about the Fiori for iOS design guidelines for the visual design part, as well as you can explore the UI components. So talking about colors first is that you can see that the color scheme is derived from the new Fiori Horizon theme, which you might know from your SAP web development. And you can browse through the semantic colors in light mode and in dark mode. And for typography, you see that since version 7.0, the new primary font is called SAP 72. These new font styles use the iOS system text styles and support dynamic types to enable accessibility features. In general, I would really emphasize that you can create applications for all sorts of people with all sorts of disabilities because our components defined by the Fiori for iOS design guidelines and implemented by the SDK are flexible, adapt to different screen sizes, and support a wide range of text sizes. So let's have a look at one of the UI components. Let's take chart card. And we see here a live preview on top. And we can now adapt this live preview. For example, we don't want to preview this as a line chart, but rather to a waterfall. And instead of the subtitle, which says currently in millions of US dollars, we want to have a trend, which is then 33.3% in this case. And we get a nice little triangle that this is an upward trend. And we can also then further play around with the properties and the settings. And as a developer, it's really nice that I can click on the export button, and the export button shows me the necessary Swift code, which I can copy and paste. And then that's the first stepping stone to get familiar with the UI component and then really to integrate this into the application. But at the end, I will show you a really nice trick how to leverage the Xcode preview functionality, which was dramatically improved in Xcode 14, so that you can take the reusable UI components, which are implemented in UIKit, and you can show them in the canvas of Xcode by wrapping them into SwiftUI. So that's the big part of the demo later on. So now that we have seen the Fiori Mentor application, I want to point out that there are extensive guidelines about the Fiori for iOS design guidelines. You can get familiar and read more about its foundation, page types, patterns, and UI components, and especially about the new object card view, which I will use as an example later on, which is a newer version of the object card and is a flexible visual container that holds groups of information together. So I will switch back to the presentation, and we have seen these parts. I have shown you the Fiori Mentor app. As I said, you can download it from the App Store. And next part is the SAP BTP SDK for iOS. In this session, I will not cover the prerequisite steps of getting a trial account for the business technology platform, how to set up mobile services, download the SDK for iOS from the developer center. All these steps are summarized in a comprehensive tutorial, which is accessible for you. And I will focus on the last part of using the assistant to generate an Xcode project. So check out the tutorial if you're not so familiar with our SDK. And I will now switch to the assistant. And the assistant is part of the SDK, but it's a macOS application which you can run, and you can then reuse an existing application definition which you might have in mobile services, or you can create a new application. I have therefore to connect to mobile services or to the global account in the BTP, which has mobile services on it. I will call this app Devtoberfest, comsap demo identifier Devtoberfest. These are information relevant in SAP mobile services. I want to point out a new functionality which was introduced with version 9.0, customized theming. And there is the capability of exporting your theme information from the UI theme designer, normally accessible from the SAP Launchpad, upload those theme information to SAP mobile services, and then your app can download these theming informations and apply them live to it. I don't think I will show you this, but I will show you the underlying core capability of styling the reusable UI components. And then it will ask me to connect against my BTP account. I might even get two-factor authentication. I have expected that. So let me just quickly open on my phone the app, which I have to specify the one-time code. And once authenticated, I can now see the OData services associated with my app definition. I have OData services right here because SAP Mobile Services comes with a sample backend to play around so that the assistant can generate a fully functional app. I will choose the V2 OData service here, and I can specify if I want to create an online application which requires network connectivity, or I can choose an offline app where data is stored locally, safely on my device, and then I can work with this data and later on upload the delta information. So I will now create the information in mobile services, and then normally the process in the assistant goes further with specifying some Xcode information. But to save some time for us, I have already done that. And I will now switch to Xcode, for which I have already generated this project. And you can see that this is an Xcode project with a README saying that this application was generated by the assistant, and it contains all the necessary code to run. So let's try this. Let's install this in the simulator, and I now switch to the simulator. The app gets installed. And first, we are getting greeted with a welcome step, which is one of the predefined onboarding steps you can remove or configure to your liking. And this is intended to greet the user. And actually, I have installed the app. So this is the restore flow. A user revisits the application. I have specified a passcode for which then information are getting protected and encrypted with that. And you can see here all of the entity sets of the sample backend are listed. I can view all the existing products in the sample backend. And I could then even edit this information and play them back to the backend so that they're getting saved. But that's not my main intention right now here. But as you can see, this is a fully functional CRUD application with a minimum UI. It's not the most beautiful because we don't have any metadata to make it more beautiful. The assistant can generate a CRUD application for any kind of OData service. So for me now, the main idea of this session is to get you familiar with how to now use these UI components in Xcode. And for this, we will switch back to Xcode. And we will create now a new file. And let's call this file the object card view demo. And we will use capabilities of the SAP Fiori framework. And previews are a feature which is built in Xcode, but it relies on SwiftUI views. So what I will do right now is to implement an preview view. And I don't want this now here in production code, so I will use a compiler directive only when I compile for debug that this code will be used. I will import SwiftUI as a framework from Apple, and then I will create an struct which complies to the preview provider, and I have to fulfill the requirements of this protocol, and for this I will implement the computed property previews, which has to return some view of SwiftUI. So in this example, I will just add a placeholder to be replaced. And now our project compiles still fine. And what I will do is I will enable now the canvas in Xcode, and I can start the preview. And this was revamped in Xcode 14. Now it has live capabilities. So if I now change code, these code changes are getting reflected nearly instantaneously in the canvas. So for example, live changes, we see them here. Wonderful. Now you have to note that SAP Fiori provides reusable UI components built with Apple's UI Kit framework, but previews require SwiftUI views. So how do we do this? So we have to use, for example, UI view controllers in a preview. And for this purpose, we will create now an extension on UI view controller with the idea that we can take any UI view controller and get an representation of it, which can be used in SwiftUI. And for a view controller, this is normally done by the UI view controller representable. So this is now a helpful extension. And let's also start now with the view controller, which we want to view. Now let's create this one, and we will inherit from the FUI form table view controller. And what we can now do is we can replace our preview, this with an UI navigation controller, use as a root view controller, we are using the object demo view controller, and we will now call the preview property, which is provided by our extension, to get this updated here in the canvas. However, we have no information yet. So let's change that because our view controller is a subclass of FUI form table view controller. We will override the view.load and say, hey, we want to register the FUI object card table view cell, which we then want to use later on. I will override the table view number of rows in section. I want to just show one row. And I will also, I will ignore this for the moment. I will override the function table view cell for row add. And let's start by saying we want to use the FUI object card table view cell, and we will return this cell. And this should fix the crash at least. But it will most likely not show anything because we have not configured the cell yet. So let's do cell, and then we can say title, and we can use the text property to set a title, SwiftUI demo. And because the preview crashed, it does not automatically refresh. We have to start it, but once it's started, we will see a live preview of that. So that's nice. And let's also add a detailed image view. We are now loading an image from the asset catalog. And Xcode has a nice preview of different orientation, dynamic type variants for how does the UI look with different font sizes. And I will choose color scheme variants, so we can have a preview in light mode as well as in dark mode. And we can do further changes. For example, let's do cell subtitle and text, and this is Devtoberfest. And we will use the footnote text to say this is pretty cool. And let's also provide a text for the status. Live session in progress. And here I would like to point something out. Okay, sometimes the preview, okay, now shows us nicely. Now let's make use of some of the colors and the color palette of the SDK. For this purpose, let's use for the status a specific text color, and we're using from the SDK an extension on UI color to say what is the preferred color and for the style. So we say for the primary, or let's say information background, what is the primary color? Primary label maybe. Or positive label. Let's say that's something positive, right? Positive label. So now the green color is getting used. Okay, so perfect. And in the object card, there are possibilities to have now up to 2 buttons, primary action and a secondary action, and we have an overflow action as well. So maybe let's start with the primary action, and let's say set hidden to false. And we can now set the title through the function set title. And we see here, learn more for default state. And we can now also maybe have a secondary action is hidden false, and secondary action set title cancel for default. And the overflow action looks like this, that it's 3 buttons, which you can then add an action handler to it. We can see this right now here. You can provide an action handler for this ... and then you can attach an action handler to present a dialogue of additional actions, and which then can be executed by the user. But this is how you use an existing reusable component from the SDK with live preview capabilities in Xcode. That's pretty nice. Then let's do one more example with the what's new component. And for this, let's have a quick look and understanding about the onboarding. And let me just switch to the simulator and delete the application. Let me switch to the simulator here. We want to delete this and we want to run it. And time. So if the app is installed for the very first time, the user gets presented with an onboarding step with a welcome step. And I will show you how this is then handled in Xcode. So you can see here that the assistant has generated a class called Onboarding Flow Provider, which makes use of the SAP Fiori Flows framework. And we have different steps depending on if the user onboards for the very first time or for a user who comes back to the application. And one step which we haven't seen in detail is one of the new steps, which potentially downloads theming information from SAP mobile services. But the first step, which presents an UI, is this welcome screen step. So we want to add a new onboarding step, and let's create a new file for this. What's new onboarding step? And import SAP Fiori Flows and create what's new onboarding step, which conforms to a protocol called onboarding step. And this requires us to implement 3 functions, because a step can be used during the initial onboarding, during a user which comes back, or actually the onboarding can be aborted and is called then therefore reset. So the idea is that we are presenting here an UI, the welcome screen UI, but we also want to develop this in SwiftUI first, right? So for this, we will also import SAP Fiori, because we want to make use of an component, which is the FUI what's new controller. So let's start first by having the preview only in debug and import SwiftUI. Now we will have to create the controller. And for this purpose, no, we actually want to make use of the existing view controller. And for this purpose, let's continue with the preview. We implement the preview provider. For the moment, let's do text to be replaced. And this should compile. And I should be able to now enable the canvas and see the change. So we have the utility to add any view controller to it into a SwiftUI preview, but let's do this first by saying, okay, we need to create something which, if we are familiar with the FUI, what's new view controller is that it requires a data source and a delegate. The data source provides the information of what should be presented by the view controller, and the delegate can then react on events handled by the view controller. So in this case, let's create the delegate and as well as the data source. And now when the preview should compile, we should see something, and I will walk you through that code. So let's move this. Should be, of course, we have to replace this one here with UI navigation controller as the root view controller. We are using the controller here, and we say preview. And now we have here an interactive preview, and let's walk through this. The data source I have implemented conforms to the FUI What's New View Controller data source, and it returns an array of UI view controllers to be presented. Here I have an array of FUI What's New detailed page controllers, and in the initializer of my data source, I create these pages now. The first page, I'm showing an image view here with the title label offline access, and I set the description text view. And I have a second page, which I can now swipe to. And you can see here automatically the view controller handles the text of the button. If it's not the last page, it's called next, and on the last one, it says start. Okay. And now we want to use this control in our onboarding flow. So what do we have to do to make this happen? One thing is that we would have to create the, like, let's say we only want to have that for new users. So we want to create a data source, What's New View controller with a data source and delegate. And we are creating them here. So we can just access that. And What's New demo delegate. And we can now create a navigation controller, and we can use from the context. It is the presentation delegate to present this view controller. And we could handle the optional error situation, but in this case, let's not care about that for demo purposes. But now we know that if the last step, if start gets pressed, the view controller should be dismissed. So how do we do this? We have in our delegate, we have a function for this, did finish flow, but we have not implemented this. So for this purpose, we have to do this. And first we have to provide an option that the onboarding context and the completion handler can be called. And with this, we can say in the onboarding context, the presentation delegate, we want to dismiss the view controller. And we have the optional error here. But let's assume this is not the case. And we will then have to inform to the framework for the onboarding that the step is completed. So this is done by calling the completion handler and say success. We do here a weak self, and now this at least should compile. but we have not set it up yet correctly up here. Here we would have to now pass in the onboarding completion handler and the onboarding context for this matter. But the nice thing is, due to our preview, we know already what we want to present, and now we just have to a little bit fiddle with the Fiori Flows framework, how to bring this into our overall application. And we can try to test that now by switching to our simulator. And nothing happens. Yes, because I have not added the step to the onboarding. So we will have to add this here as the step before the welcome screen. So this is the what's new onboarding step. And we'll switch back to the simulator. And now we can see that this control is now added. And if we say start, then the welcome step gets executed next. So yeah, I think that was a pretty good run through. Let me go back to the presentation and conclude this session here. And what we have seen is the object card view, which was introduced in version 8.0. Now you know how to use the reusable UI components and use the Xcode preview functionality, wrap the UI view controllers into SwiftUI, use them in previews. And I have shown you even how to incorporate an UI component into the onboarding flow. That's if you're using SAP Fiori Flows as the onboarding framework itself. Thank you. If you have questions, leave them here and I will get back to you, and have fun with the rest of the Devtoberfest sessions. And I hope that you will return to the SDK and have fun developing beautiful native mobile applications. Bye.